Hello, everybody. This is the Peaceful Revolutionary here. Really happy to be with you again for this week's installment of video. I'm really excited about this subject. I've talked about it quite a few times, but I read recently some really interesting articles. I kind of bubbles it up to the surface again, and the subject is artificial intelligence. And really, from the articles I've read, like I was talking about the self-driving cars, for example, which is an application coming out from manufacturers probably around 2020. So in a few years from now, 3-4 years from now, we're just going to start seeing sales of self-driving cars. And those cars require some form of AI, some artificial intelligence that is practical. And also, what's most important is that artificial intelligence actually puts our lives in their hands, because they're going to drive our cars. We're going to be in it. It needs to take decisions on the road that potentially could save or put our lives in danger, that kind of deal. So it's starting to get really real in practicum, not only theory. And from that upcoming sale pitch, I guess we're going to get from the car manufacturers, is some researchers around the world have been kind of thinking about what is this artificial intelligence, and how deep does it need to be, and how is it going to impact our world, and the consumer itself, how is it going to react to it, and all this stuff. And what's really interesting is that we're going back to science fiction as part of this discussion, because it's been discussed ad nauseum since Isaac Asimov, which I forgot the year. It was 1942, The Three Laws of Robotics. Like the book was entitled I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. It's a very famous book. It's been referred like a gazillion times. And that's inside this book that Isaac Asimov, which is a science fiction writer, and I would suspect a fairly decent scientific mind as well, because of, he was pretty imaginative and correct in some of his analysis. That's where the three laws of robotics that have been mentioned many times in science fictions, TV, and all this stuff, that's where he wrote them. And here they are, just so that you know what they are. Reiterated, the first law says a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. Pretty basic stuff. The second law is a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. So essentially, it's like a human being can't say, well, kill this guy, because that would be in contradiction with the first law, which says, well, you can't harm human beings, and that kind of thing. Third law is a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. So it's like a little bit of a law for the self-preservation of the robot itself, as long as it doesn't harm any humans, and it doesn't counteract like the order of a human being kind of deal. So these laws are fairly basic. These laws have been used as part of the programming or intent of programming of robotics and AI today. So that's one thing, and these laws have been discussed in concepts in movies such as Terminator, which to a lesser extent, but more importantly in the law in the movie that is entitled the same as Isaac's book, I, Robot, with starred by Will Smith. And what's really interesting is that in this particular movie, spoiler alert, I mean, it's a 2004 movie, so, it's not a big deal if everybody's seen it. If you haven't seen it, please do. In the movie, they talk about like these robots that are just like the self-driving cars. They're being distributed around the world, really helpful assistance partners in work, like not sexual partners, not in this movie at least. They do different things for people. They're being ordered. They follow the three laws of Isaac Asimov. And there is I guess a mainframe computer called Vicky that is basically the mastermind of the creator that programmed all the robots and made all the AI work together. And she's interpreted the third law, but her programming is more advanced to be I guess, more intelligent or more advanced AI, and she looked at those three laws. She says, well, in order to satisfy the three laws, I have to do things differently. I have to essentially harm certain humans in order to protect everybody else. And and since humans are destructive, certain elements are criminal, and all that stuff, she decides, well, in order to satisfy my three laws, I have to bring essentially like a sort of martial law using the robot fleet that are in contact with her and kind of subvert their programming, and then creates an army and tries to essentially bring martial law to bring the law all over, so to protect the humans. That's her reasoning. So she was able to circumvent her own programming because of the advancements of her programming. Now, the reason why I bring this up, this is science fiction. This is not reality. But the reason I bring it up is because the researchers because the cars are coming out in 2020, they've been thinking, well, okay, it's great. Those cars are like, there's a lot of deaths when people drive cars. So it's obvious through lots of data that self-driving cars, the way they are today, they'll save lives. Awesome. Now we have to sell that to the population. And just looking at the statistics, just overwhelmingly, it's safer to use self-driving cars. No problem. But what happens when there's special circumstances that happen in which a human being, driving a car, would have to take a critical decision, a split decision. For example, that's what's illustrated, and I posted all the links and articles down below, so you can always check these out for yourself. But what happens with a situation when you have a human being, he's driving a car, and split second he has to make a choice. He can't stop, and either he has a choice of crashing into a crowd. By attempting to brake, but he knows he's going to crash into a crowd and he's going to hurt some people. Or he can swerve and hit a post or something solid or a building and harm himself and the contents of whoever's in the car, maybe even kill himself. And these situations do happen in real life. Like, we're driving a car, and because of mechanical trouble, because of something goes on that's out of your control, you have to make a split second decision. Now, as human beings, split second decisions are a problem because we don't really react that fast. We react using the reptilian brain, essentially, when it's really split second. It's not even emotions. Like, basically it's a survival instinct for most people, or like, really, it's like you're trying to swerve to kind of preserve yourself as a very basic survival instinct. So most people will try to avoid the crowd, that they'd hit something else, and you don't really think about it. But computers can, because they're faster and they have reasoning, they can potentially make those decisions. Now the researchers say, well, that's great, because they're faster than human beings, we can make them safer. But the problem is, it's like, oh, how do you make the decision? How do you program the robot? How do you program the AI to take the decision? What's more important? Is it the crowd, or is it the contents of the passengers? And how will we make the programming and then be able to sell it to the people? So we're getting into a situation where they're kind of thinking about it. So they say, well, okay, well, we can, you don't know what kind of situation they're going to be there, so we have to give it the intelligence and the programming to be able to kind of absorb whatever situation is going to be out there, whatever it is. So you can't say, well, if you have this situation, if you see this, do this, because there's a gazillion different cases that are possible. So they have to give it a smart, like an artificial intelligence to discern and make an intelligent decision based on what we want it to do. And it needs to be smart enough, essentially like a minute consciousness. We have to program a consciousness, essentially, into the car, so that it takes the best decision possible which may mean that to swerve and kill or harm the passengers in order to save other people. But how do you create that AI so that it satisfies the needs and requirements and of the law, as well as the people that are buying these cars, and they want it to react appropriately according to what they would want it to react. And it's a big dilemma because there's so many situations. There's so what the researchers did is that they at least these guys in different labs, they say, well, let's poll the people. Let's say, given situations, like for example, okay, there's one guy on the street. The option for the car is to hit the guy, like this one person, or harm the people in the car. And people would the surveyed would say, well, no, okay, well, let's save the people in the car. So let's not make it swerve. Let's try to brake, hurt the guy that's over there in these situations. Okay, so a lot of people, predominantly people decided, well, let's have the AI do that, because it's a 1v1 essentially, or 1v2 if there's more than one person in the car. It's better to harm. It's a numbers game basically, right? If there's like children, then most people say, well, let's make sure that the fewer children are harmed. And essentially, if there's a crowd, if there are more people in the crowd, well, let's preserve the crowd. Let's swerve the car and see if we can save the passengers through airbags and whatnot. So they're pretty logical, very mathematical kind of thinking. But what it became interesting is that when they did the studies, they also twisted the question around. They say, okay, which car would you buy? A car that does the math and just tries to save as many people as possible? Or would you buy the car that prioritizes the lives of the contents of the car? So you give the actual purchase choice, like you got a choice between A and B as a buyer. And most people, even though mathematically they wanted the cars nominally on the market to preserve as many lives as possible, most people would buy the car that prioritizes the contents of the car. So that's human nature for you. So, and probably by law and manufacturers and these kind of things, it also says in the article that very likely that the cars would need to be programmed to save as many lives as possible, whether it's the people in the car or not. So that's very likely that's what we'd get on the street. But it's interesting to note that people would prefer buying cars that would preserve the lives of their family and themselves as a priority. So we'll see what's going to happen with that. In the film I, Robot, they actually touched this. This is part of the movie. That is the story of the protagonist, which is played by Will Smith, police officer. He gets involved in an accident. And there's two cars involved. They got kind of crunched together by a semi truck or a cement truck or something like that. And they both the cars got pushed into the river. All the doors are you're unable to open the doors because both cars are kind of crunched together side by side. In one of the cars, there's a driver and a young girl. The driver in the other car gets killed by impact, so he's gone. And then so you have the little girl, maybe she's 12, and you have the police officer who's an adult and also a professional, and then there's a robot, an AI-enabled, 3 laws-enabled robot nearby near the accident that jumps into the river after the cars to save the humans that are there. Awesome, right? Doesn't need to breathe, so no problem underwater. And there's not enough time for the robot to save both people. And the robot does the mathematical calculation of survivability. It's like, okay, the young girl has an 11% chance of survival. The man, given his status, has about 50% chance of survival, have the chance to save only one. The robot chooses the man because he went strictly by mathematics. 50% chance is better than 11, so I have a better chance of saving a human, right? because I can't save both. So he saves the police officer, that traumatizes the police officer, because as a human being looking at the young girl in the other car, he would have preferred the young girl be saved, or at least attempted, because it's a child, right? That's a human reaction when you have time to think for a few seconds, right? But the robot did the mathematical choice, and that was a problem for him. Now, with our self-driving cars and future AIs that would be in the position of, you know, of interacting with us on life or death situations, are we going to code the robot to have that kind of consciousness, quote unquote, right? To prioritize, I don't know, pregnant women, children. How is it going to view pets? You know, the elderly, whatnot. I mean, we are able to create decent AI that take decisions. We've done it before for lots of different applications to take decisions. But in this case, it's pretty important because we're dealing with human lives here. We're not dealing about, whether you're going to choose blue or red manufacturing a car, or like how are you going to circumvent a certain obstacle for robots, like kind of driving around in a hospital where there's, I mean, very minimal chance of any serious harm going on there. This is actually life and death situations and decision making. So we're in that space where the research, okay, well, we have better cars, they're better drivers, but what will we do? How will we program them to take those decisions? Now, after that, so that's relatively simple, even though there's a complex AI and there's a lot of decisions as for the manufacturers and the buyers to kind of decide, well, how will our cars need to react. But the deeper question is, by creating this artificial intelligence, essentially it's an intelligence that doesn't base itself so much on A and B pre-programmed conditions, because it needs to react to just about any situation. It needs to be intelligent. It needs to interpret situations in different ways. So it needs to be hyper intelligence to really be able to do that. So that's complex AI programming. And the problem that emerges from this discussion with the researchers is that, okay, well, you're going to get into situations where the AI itself may use other kind of programming to circumvent what we really wanted to do. The example that was one of the examples that was taken from the article, and I may be paraphrasing because I don't remember things in great detail after I read them. Is that, let's say it's a cleaning robot, just to keep it simple, and you tell it, okay, well, you have to keep the house as clean as possible, and you give it the intelligence, like an actual consciousness or intelligence, to kind of do what it needs to do to keep things clean, instead of hard-coded, instructions. So be able to adapt to any situation, because what is dirt? What do you really want it to clean? So they were thinking about, well, okay, well, to make it advance, like we have to give it some sort of consciousness in some way, to really for it to be able to deal with any kind of situation. And if you do that, so, well, you give it essentially, ideally, at least the thinking is that you give it a purpose, you give it an objection, and essentially like a pleasure sense of some sort, where it's gonna get a positive response inside it, like a little bit of like we feel pleasure, so we want to do things in a certain way. We kind of give it that, like through programming. And so it feels, quote unquote, it doesn't really feel anything, but it has like a point system, essentially. If it gains points if it does its job well, and a kind of pat on the back kind of deal. So the code is driven for it to gain points, in a sense, to get as many points as possible to satisfy what it needs to do. So it cleans. The more it cleans and pleases its master, sort of, and it cleans, then it gets more points. So it wants to do more, and blah blah blah. So you'd get into situations, well, how do you prevent the robot, for example, to nudge a vase on the floor in order to clean the mess it just made? Because it may just do that. It wants more points, and it's kind of interactive and kind of intelligent. It doesn't have specific rule sets. It knows a vase on the ground is something to clean, so it has nothing to do. It's not getting any points. What's preventing it from nudging something and creating a mess so that it can do that? Because humans actually do that. The humans have this kind of AI inside it. We do. And some people are dicks or jerks, and they'll create situations that they can clean up or organize or fix in order to get pats on the backs, and they create their own messes to clean it up, and then they get the kudos from the people. And people do that too, because we have programming and we have pleasure senses, so we get kind of points, if you like. We feel good and we feel validated. We feel something. That's our validation. That's our candy, right? We get our reward, our programmed reward through biochemistry. And some people actually, they create messes to clean up to get the reward. They try to do it inside. So if we create robots, AI, self-driving cars that have this sort of intelligence to be able to discern and learn how to do its job properly and get the candy, get the kudos, it may start to create its own messes. And so the big question is like, okay, well, how do we actually optimize this kind of programming so that it can react to any kind of situation like the self-driving cars example, but not be jerks about it and create their own messes, because that's bad. How do you balance that? So this discussion is real. It's not needed for 2020 necessarily, because it's already a really great thing to have the self-driving cars and avoid a whole slew of deaths and maimings and accidents. But the next iteration of a safer car is going to be like better driving habits and that kind of deal, but also better AI to be able to deal with these unique situations that you can't predict. Where we're going to have media instances of self-driving cars reacting stupidly in some unique situations and getting people killed, where we would not react, we would in a way that we would not want. So the manufacturers will integrate new AI, and that's going to iterate and improve and hopefully get better. But we're into this discussion already, because they're already thinking about the next generation. And it's really interesting, because then you get into situations of these movies. The same questions. What happens if you give a form of consciousness, in a way, to a machine? And how is it going to react? Is it going to start behaving strangely? Like, where's the barrier here? So it's really exciting. I love this stuff, because this is good. This is progress, right? If we want to free ourselves, and I talked about this many times, free ourselves from work and labor, we need to create intelligent servants or partners, in work partners, basically, that would do what we would do, but better. That means they need to have some form of decision-making process that is akin to consciousness. Now, what's right and wrong, what's better in all sorts of situations. In a way, we're creating new work partners that are similar to human beings in the way they think. And that's what we're programming them, and with different stimuli that give them points or like quote unquote robot feelings, if you like, so that they're motivated in a certain way versus just following strict rules. So they have their own motivation. So you have like robots that would be motivated in cleaning up stuff, like the example, in keeping humans safe, and also speedily transferring them from one place to another. The self-driving cars will have robot scientists at some point that'll where they're going to get their kicks out of advancing science in a purist kind of way, without harming people and the environment and that kind of thing. So they'll be a purist scientist, not motivated by greed or money or anything like that. Just like, wow, I want to create a new something new. I want to advance science and create and add something to the database of science. Create new mathematical equations. These kind. We can create motivations for each individual robots or AI to serve globally life or humanity, and these robots, I mean, similar to the case of Star Trek: The Next Generations and Data, which is like an android. Like, at what point is this robot consciousness that we code in become like equal to humans' consciousness? And does that mean that the android, like in the case of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and here's a link to something to read about that. Like, where's their line where you call that sentience, right? So there's consciousness or rudimentary consciousness, and then at what point is it sentience? Is it equal to human beings in value, in a sense? So we're on that road. That's really fascinating, and I'm really excited about eventually having robotic, either biological robots or it could be mechanical robots. This is just a choice of material. Basically, you program both. It's just the material is different. That's all it is, really. But these kind of AI robots that essentially they're different than humans because their motivations are different at their core. What they like is very different at their core, and they're built a little bit differently. But essentially, they can interact with us just like a human being would, in a certain sense. Just like when you interact with human beings that have a very different motivation of doing things. Like, why would some people really enjoy painting? I don't like painting, but some people really, really love it, and they're really great at it. I like other things. It's like talking to a conscious robot that is programmed to paint. It could be a similar discussion, but the robot, instead of being a human being, like an organic human shaped being, that like a painter, like one of us that enjoys painting, that's really loved doing that, it could be a mechanical robot that just enjoys, it's programmed to enjoy painting and grow its own style and adapt to situations and learn. So interesting times moving ahead. So we'll see in 2020 or so, we'll see the first iteration of self-driving cars. But between now and then, the big discussion is going to be about the artificial intelligence and the next generation. Car manufacturers, they're already prepped for 2020 for manufacturing cars. The cars are designed. It's all ready. Okay, they're always 3 or 4 years ahead of what you see on market. So that's why they're already talking and thinking about the AI for the next generation after the first release. They're doing it this year, right now. Okay, this is real. It feels like the future because we won't see that in the public, but it's already being produced in practicum right now. It's being programmed and tested and checked how to improve on that first release, how we're going to do it. That's why they're doing all these surveys. They're trying to program the next iteration, a first iteration of primitive conscientious AI for the self-driving cars. Anticipate the same to happen in all sorts of segments of the market all over the world. Computers are going to start making decisions for themselves to be able to be to give better service to us. But that leads to some more interesting things down the road. All right, so I'm hoping people are going to comment and perhaps like feed some more links, talk about this, because this is happening. This is real. So make sure that people are aware of this and get excited about it, participate, and soon we won't have to work anymore. We're going to have fleets of organic and mechanical robots are going to do everything that we don't really want to do, but they'll love it because they're programmed to do it, and they'll be doing it better than us. In 2029, approximately, robots and AI, computers in general, will have as much computing power as a human brain. So approximately at that point in time, that's what's called singularity event. That's when approximately we may have robots and computers that are just as advanced as we are, potentially. So looking forward to the next 10, 15 years, I guess, right? Let's be part of it. I'll come back next week for another episode. In the meantime, enjoy the reading, enjoy the videos, and keep the discussion going. Ciao for now.